Good evening and welcome to the program this evening. Want to thank you, our viewers, as usual, for joining us again, and for some who have been waiting in the lobby, I would say, for us to go live. Thank you for being there. We appreciate your time and you joining us this evening. Um, Before we start the program tonight, I want to make an important announcement. Now, we're based in the UK here, and tonight is Guy Fawkes night. So there's a lot of noise going on. We're already using some artificial intelligence to clear our audio and to make it clearer. But in case you hear any bang, 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 there are no gunshots going around. It's just fireworks filtering a little bit into the studio. But thank you again for joining us this evening. And Prof, thank you for being here every week with your insights. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that. What is it's not a warning, but at least for letting us know that if we hear any bang bang, I shouldn't take a dive behind my chair. These days, you never can tell. Guns all over the place, on the streets of America, on the streets of Nigeria, Mali. Oh, good heavens. Thank you.
Everywhere. All right.
Every-
um, Prof, let's get into the questions. Last week, I put you on the spot, and I said, um, "How are you going to call the elections in the United States?" You made your call, and we were hoping that by this time we would know who that is. But we're still sitting on the knife edge, and we're still eagerly awaiting the outcome of the election in the United States. What are your views regarding the situation there?
Well, I'm really. It's either it is Biden or Trump, and all the indications are that it will be Biden. However, I'm not really interested in the projection simply because I am extremely distressed by the the results of the election itself and the processes that surround the conduct of the election. I am in a mood of lamentation. Lamentation for my generation, lamentation for the Americans, lamentation for the younger generation, lamentation for the whole world. Now, why? Surely, if, as it looks, that Biden is likely to win, I should be in a celebratory mood. But I am not. If, as it looks now, the last figure I checked before I came in for this program shows that I think 67 or 68 million Americans as of now have voted for Trump. in spite of all that we know about the man, not about electoral gimmickry, but his pattern of behavior in the past 4 years shows that he has no values. I'm not talking about sexual values. I'm talking about a man who doesn't believe in anything except himself. I mean, that shows up on the tapes, out of which a book has been made now by Woodward. A man who knew that COVID-19 was going to ravage the United States. And not only did he not level with the Americans, which, because he said he didn't want to panic them, fine, but to allow them to take no precautions. And yet he knew what was going to happen. He's a man who not only allows, but encouraged behavior of narcissism in the United States, a nation that went to Europe to fight narcissism and has cemeteries all over Europe where American young men and some of American brightest generals lost their lives and are resting on the soil of Europe. The anti-Nazi struggle consecrated by the blood of American soldiers. And yet this man allows Nazi symbols, Nazi flags, the swastika to be paraded on the streets of the United States, desecrating the memory of the American soldiers who lost their lives in Europe. 67 million of Americans still went ahead to vote for this man. And that's about 49.5% of the electorate. Let me tell you something. Hitler did not win more than 30% of German voters. And yet, the seeds that Hitler planted on the soil of the world has sprouted and germinated. And it is to be found in one form or the other in the populism that we have in the world. Not to talk about 49.5% of the vote in the United States. You see, the first president that I will meet in my life was John F. Kennedy. Met him at the age of 20, 1962. So for my entire life, the civilization that, if you like, I piloted my life by was the American civilization. So you can understand how I feel to see the decline of this civilization. Nothing manifests this decline more than the result of this election. Reminds me of the of the fall of the Roman Empire. It didn't just collapse one day, gradual decline of the Roman Empire, so that the Roman Empire of Julius Caesar, of Augustus Caesar, became the Roman Empire of Nero, the one who fiddled while Rome burnt. So you can now understand how I feel about this election. I was expecting a resounding defeat, a resounding denunciation of Trump by the Americans, and instead an endorsement of Trump. So, and the fact now is that this is what your generation and the generation of my grandchildren will have to live with.
Prof, one area that a lot of people just seem not to get their heads around and feel is an unjust system is this issue of the Electoral College. This was one of the places where Clinton was stung very badly in the last elections. And yet again, the Democratic Party is facing this challenge where the race to get electoral votes could be the deciding factor. What are your views on that whole setup of having an electoral college that you then have to go through in the elections when clearly Biden has won over 72 million votes already?
Well, you know, we dealt with this issue. I can't remember. I mean, we've had so many sessions of this program, but one of our sessions we dealt with this issue where I actually referred to the Electoral College or as an anachronism, and I was hoping that a resounding victory for Biden will enable that will have been manifested in control of the Senate by large majority, control of the House of Representatives by large majority, control of state governors, control of state assemblies by large majority, would have allowed, perhaps, at least I called for a revisit of that institution, which was set up in 1776. For goodness sake, this is the 21st century. It is an anachronism. But you know what? This election actually shows that the whole of the American electoral system is an anachronism. Look, this is the second or the third day after the elections. America can still not declare who its president is. A country that sent men to the moon, a country that built the space satellite up there, a country that at least has, technological innovations all over the place. You are still counting ballots by hand. That's number one. Number two, different counties have different rules as regards when you can open the ballot, the postal ballot, what hour you can open that, what do you do with the different counties for God's sake, in 2020. And that is really, and I sit there and see these famous American pundits almost gleefully, as if they are reveling in, oh, is that county that has this role? And so they should be ashamed of themselves. The Americans really are a spoilt lot. Because if this were happening in other parts of the world, I can see these same American pundits drawing attention to the fact that this is unacceptable, this is disgraceful, this is this, this is that. Not one single American pundit has come out in the past 3 days to say we cannot go on like this. It's almost as if, well, this is what makes us America. This is what we are. It shows that the process is working. Excuse me, the process has broken down. The process has broken. And if the United States is not careful, a time is going to come when people are really going to say, we don't really care. We don't really care. We'll move on to other things. Don't get me wrong. The United States is still powerful economically, is still powerful militarily, but the United States is no longer great in terms of admiration, respect, or what have you.
Prof, let me pick you up on the point about the electoral system and the counting of the votes still going on. As you've rightly highlighted, some people are talking of it as the strength and the resilience of the American system, and a process where they are giving the voters their voice. Every vote should count, and that the fact that the nation has not erupted into major unrest at this point is evidence that the system is working.
No, no. The emphasis is at this point. As of the last count, there are demonstrations in 7 major American cities, including Philadelphia, where I lived for 3 years. This is in the 60s, not recently. You are starting, number one, to harass and put under stress those doing the actual counting, because I'm sure they can hear the noises being made from outside by demonstrators. I believe in one of the cities, I can't remember which one now. In fact, pro-Trump demonstrators actually burst into the counting hall. So what are you waiting for? Until when riots break out on count the votes, don't count the votes? The longer this takes, the longer you will be empowering the streets to actually take over a process or a system that you think works. We can say now, oh, well, it's just the system works. Although for me, not used to seeing demonstrators on the American street as part of the post-electoral process, I don't say the system is working. I think the system is breaking down.
Prof, there's also another point you raised here, and someone on YouTube has pointed this out, and I want to draw your attention back to it. Is this issue of each state having control over what they do in the context of true federalism, and when we're looking at options of restructuring, giving different sectors the ability to control their own destiny in a sense. Is that not what is happening in the United States now, with each of these states having the power that they need to control what works for them?
Well, quite true, provided you are talking about a state office. But when we are talking about a national office, like who occupies the White House, there should be a uniform process because you are dealing with a national office. And I don't think that it is antithetical to true federalism for you to have a uniform electoral laws, and uniform electoral process determined by either Congress or, in fact, by a decision of the Supreme Court to say that all states, all counties must have uniform laws when it comes to election of president, Senate, House of Rep. For state governors, mayors, city council, yes, the state can have whatever laws that are unique and processes that are unique to the state, but not, but not election to the office of the most powerful man in the world to be subjected to the. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
All right, Prof, let's start to look at where we are now. Uh, Biden is already well ahead. There is still a route to the White House for President Trump, based on the readings before we came on the program. Hoping it's still at that. So there's still a route. Help us understand the calculus of events that could happen if, at this stage in the race, for one reason or another, President Trump is able to find some votes from somewhere. That means that he eventually gets elected as the president for a second term. Do you see that happening? And if that were to happen, what would that do to democracy as we know it today?
Well, I mean, theoretically, it can happen if you go and get the Supreme Court ruling that they should stop counting. In fact, you know there is a judgment, a subsisting judgment that in Philadelphia, for example, or in Pennsylvania, they can only count until tomorrow. I hope I'm not wrong, because the judgment, which was that of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, said you can count ballots that are stamped on November 3rd, even if they don't arrive until Friday, which is tomorrow. Well, yes, they have to arrive by tomorrow. So if they arrive on Saturday, they can no longer be counted. But the strategy of Trump now is to throw so many cases at the courts. And don't forget, he appointed over 200 judges, federal judges, during his first term in office. Some of those cases can land before some of those judges are appointed. And then you will get some judge issuing an injunction, stop counting, and then they'll have to stop counting while they appeal to Court of Appeal, and then go to State Supreme Court, and then from there go to the Federal Supreme Court. So even if the Federal Supreme Court says no, go back and start counting, remember there was a time when this was Gore versus Bush, when the United States did not know who his president was going to be until December. But in that case, neither Gore nor Bush appealed to the streets. In this particular case, you have one of the candidates who lacks values, who doesn't believe in anything, and who is prepared and has been priming his gun-carrying supporters. And he will be prepared to encourage them to go to the streets. So the longer the system, the processes last without a definitive declaration of someone, the greater the chances of violence. Now, if through all this finagling and what have you, Trump somehow manages to pull it off, basically liberals are decent people. It's part of the ideology of liberalism that you don't resort to any other means to either express your grievance or achieve your purpose. But if it is the other way around and Biden wins the election, expect blood on the streets of American streets.
Prof, if we look across the nations of the world today, and some of them, I will put some points to you in detail. We are seeing whether it's Tanzania, we look at, whether it's Ethiopia, we look at, or Belarus that we look at. All these nations have had elections, and we're hearing about the same issues and the same challenges. Now, you were part of the National Electoral Reform Committee in Nigeria, and you studied electoral reform and what that should look like, and even made proposals. What is wrong with the electoral systems of the world that we cannot have peaceful elections where leaders just accept, I've lost, they go away, you let someone else come in? Why is it all turning into this huge turmoil that we're seeing all over the place?
Well, there is nothing wrong with the electoral process, but there is a whole lot wrong with the politicians who will not play by the rule of the game. Now, you listed a few countries. I wish you had thrown in Uganda, who their presidential elections is a year from today, and yet the police arrested one of the candidates who went to submit his form as for declaration of interest to run next year. They arrested him. They vandalized his car in order to pull him out of the car. And all this, they knew that the social media was recording the event. They didn't care because they knew they had a cover from the president of Uganda. Political figures who happen to be opposition figures have been arrested in Tanzania. Fighter jet planes are being sent over the province of Tigray in Ethiopia. You are bombing your own people over electoral matters. Just as we suspected was going to happen, the streets of Cote d'Ivoire are now theaters of war between police, the military, and supporters of the opposition figures, and an issue which I raised, whether it's last week or 2 weeks ago, ECOWAS is now appealing to the opposition leaders to sit down and discuss with a government that has been fraudulently elected. It got elected by changing the constitution. You didn't tell the government of the day when it was changing the constitution that it shouldn't do so. That is one of the is not one of the tenets of good governance to make a constitutional amendment that was going to be of benefit to the president, the sitting president. He engineered a constitutional amendment that allowed him to run for a third term after the concept of 2 terms had become an African norm. You didn't tell him at that time that he was looking for trouble. Now that trouble had come, ECOWAS is appealing to the opposition. And this is what the problem is. It's not that the rules are not there, but that those who occupy presidential palaces all over the world are not prepared to accept the rules of the game. It's only if the rules favor them. That's why even in the United States, Trump is saying, continue counting where I am leading, but no, stop counting where I am leading, but continue counting the votes where Biden is leading. No consistency, no principles. It's laughable.
Prof, let me ask this question here, and someone on YouTube is also echoing this. We used to look to the US for sort of moral guidance when it comes to these kind of matters. And this comment here on YouTube says the US has now lost the moral right to speak of skewed elections, organized dictatorships in the third world. First, what are your reactions to that statement? And number two, if the US has indeed lost it, who do we now look to for guidance in these sorts of matters?
Well, I started off this program by lamenting the decline. I deliberately did not use the word fall. I used the word decline of American civilization. And what the correspondent I just made reference to is one of the evidence of the decline. Although it's not going to stop the United States from preaching to other people how to conduct or not conduct their elections, but the sermon has very little credibility. Of course, you don't talk back to still a superpower, but you know, in fact, your body language will show. There is this proverb, in Africa, Falano, mind your own business first. Or if you want to go to use the go biblical, remove the beam in your own eye first before you deal with, what is in my own eye. The
Oh, oh,
second part of the
yes, sir.
the second part of the question says, what is the alternative source now
Yes.
of values? To whom do we look now? Are you the one being expected, or do we wait for another one? Well, the competing civilization now is China, and China is not a democratic country. So in as far as democracy is concerned, it is lamentable that there is no light on the hill, no light at all on the hill, to
Oh,
provide a beacon of hope and a direction for the battleship of democracy.
so, Prof, one point, I think you've addressed it, but I just want to check it here. Based on your experience on electoral reform, what changes would you make looking at what is going on across these different nations? I know that there are different issues in each of the individual nations, but what broad changes would you want to see across these nations?
I cannot be specific because, as you rightly said, we are dealing with different nations. But there are core values that one can identify. One is all people who are entitled to vote, let them register. I may even go one step ahead, although I am not sure that whether I won this battle during our deliberations on the electoral reform in Nigeria. I have an affinity for the Australian system, where in fact it is made compulsory for every voter to vote. And it's a criminal offense punishable by a fine for you not to exercise that right. I like that. It's your responsibility to have a hand in how you are ruled. Number two, count every vote. Don't put technical difficulties in the way of counting the votes cast. Let the whole process be transparent, and let the winners assume office. Don't, which implies that the judiciary should not be used to deny the credibility of the electoral results. Because that is you know, politicians, ruling politicians have got, they always come up with one gimmick or the other. And in a lot of countries, the judiciary has been compromised, that judgments are given reversing what is plainly, I mean, a legitimate electoral result, and therefore installing someone who lost at the polls. So those to me will be the core principles that we should look out for.
All right, Prof. The British foreign minister is calling for new elections in Belarus after an independent report that Britain actually called for has called the elections there unfair. What does it matter what Britain has to say about the situation in Belarus, given this fact that we've just been discussing, that US seems to be losing some credibility on being able to speak out on elections in other nations. How about the British government calling out situations in Belarus?
Well, I don't think today the dictator in Belarus is going to lose any sleep, because Britain has something to say, especially after the European Union has taken a position, the same position, uh, over a month ago. This shows no, Britain is still attempting to bat out of his weight now. Um, if it had remained in the European Union, it probably would have been, his call would have been more credible because it will be part of that credible whole. But I don't see Britain having any uh, exercise any pressure on Belarus now, which is a pity. That, but it shows one of the what you guys in Britain, in your status, in terms of your foreign policy objection.
While we're on Britain and the United Kingdom here, there is some news that can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great, great. There is some news while still on the United Kingdom. There is some news that was released last week, a few days ago, anyway, where the United Kingdom has admitted to training some of the Nigerian police force, the NSAS police force, the Nigerian police, who were the SARS police force. Do you think it's right for some of those who are calling out the British government as being culpable in training the Nigerian police force in the way that they did?
No, no, I don't think so. Britain could, in fact, argue that it took part in the training to ensure that certain modicum of behavior uh, was maintained by the policemen that they trained. Um, I believe that in fact it is, that is no condemnation of Britain. if those trained, when they then get back home, decides to forget their training. And you see, it is the system in Nigeria, not the training, because these same policemen, when they go for United Nations peacekeeping operations or African Union peacekeeping operations, they get very good record for good behavior, for excellent behavior. These same policemen, these same soldiers, the same military, Nigerian military. In fact, just last week, a Nigerian police female officer got the Police Officer of the Year award, I think by the African Union, for excellent behavior, performance beyond the call of duty in one of the police operations in Africa. It's the system when they then get back home. So that's where our focus should be on. Of course, if there is evidence that they were trained to be vicious, they were trained to violate human rights, that they were trained to be animals in uniform, then we can focus on their training. But that they were trained, to me, one could even argue that it is precisely to prevent the kind of atrocious behavior, to prevent it, that the training was designed all about. So I wouldn't blame Britain at all. And I wouldn't blame any, but of course, if we sent them to Belarus or any of those countries in the world noted for vicious behavior by security forces, then, I mean, if we were to send them to North Korea to be trained, then we will say, yes, that was, working the answer or looking for an answer to precisely what we have got. But sending them to Britain to be trained, or British officers coming to Nigeria to train them, I wouldn't hold Britain culpable for their behavior on Tuesday night.
All right, Prof. There's one question I want to put to you. We touched on it briefly, and it's the situation that is developing in Ethiopia, where we're hearing reports of the government using jets to bomb uh, certain parts of the country. Um, to what degree would a civil war in Ethiopia impact stability in Africa?
I mean, apart from the fact that there are copycats all over the place, who, if Ethiopia got away with bombing its own population, may wish to copy the act. I think the repercussion on Ethiopia itself is more horrendous than the rest of Africa. Ethiopia had gone through a vicious civil war before they then went to the conference table, and that led to, by mutual consent, the secession of Eritrea, and embedded, not embedded, in fact, clearly stated in the constitution of Ethiopia, is that any province that wants to break away is allowed to break away after, of course, going through some conditions. So how things have led to this stage where you'll not be bombing the province of Tigray is beyond me. I mean, I thought the Constitution has addressed the steps that you take if you have grievances, if you have fears that need to be addressed. I mean, of course, the fact that Ethiopia is the capital, where I mean, it is the capital of the African Union. It doesn't, it reflects badly on the African Union if Ethiopia is to degenerate into another civil war.
Mm. All right, Prof, we have about 6 minutes to go, and there is this point here that I want to put across to you. And President Trump announced a while ago his plans to remove Sudan as one of the state sponsors of terrorism. Um, Now, over the last sort of 3 weeks, France has been going through its own challenges in that area for some of the things that some French citizens have had done. Um, would you support Trump's move in removing Sudan from a country that sponsors terrorism? And at what point do you accept that a state that once sponsored terrorism now no longer does?
Well, I mean, there is a new government in Sudan, and that is bringing to book the former president of Sudan and some of the high officials of state of Sudan. During that period, when Osama bin Laden was even was allowed to stay in the Sudan before he moved to Afghanistan. And to that extent, there was a period in the life of Sudan when terrorists were allowed to operate undercover from Sudan. But there's a new government there. There has been a revolution there. So the new government is not even a product of the former government, so as to say you will hold them responsible. So to that extent, and I think that Sudan had also agreed to pay reparation for the loss of lives, American lives, due to behavior of elements who were, based in Sudan at that time. So
Yes, they've
the
agreed to
United,
pay $335 million.
so the Americans, uh, the United States is now persuaded or convinced that Sudan has seen the light of day and regrets its past behavior. And until they do otherwise, you just have to take them at their word. But I think that the 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 Trumpian Abrahamic policy of reconciliation with Israel of several Arab states is what is more behind this than this whole question of this whole question of reparation or moving Sudan away from being sponsor of terrorism. That is a quid pro quo.
All right, 2 minutes to go. And your last comments, Prof, on the program this evening regarding the US. There is a question here which I'm not sure we'll be able to do justice to in 2 minutes, but I will throw it out anyway. And it's about the fact that some judges, for example, one of the judges ruled that votes could be in certain cases not votes. They talked about observers could move closer. And the question here is about to what degree can the Supreme Court impact the elections by listening to President Trump?
Well, I'm not sure whether they are referring to, because before I came in, I became aware that there was a judge in Georgia who had just given a ruling. It models of the whole counting process. I think what bothers me, and I've tried to draw attention to, is that the legal process in the United States, as in most parts of the world, you start off at the lower level and gradually you move up until you get to the Supreme Court. And at each stage, you have to stop once the other side has indicated it is going on appeal. So it's a delaying tactics. And the delaying tactics activates uncertainty. Uncertainty increases the level of stress and violence, especially because the violence is encouraged by the occupant of the White House. So it may not even be at the Supreme Court, Trump may lose, but he will have achieved his purpose of completely demystifying, completely destroying even the legitimacy, or if at the end of the day Biden wins, he will have destroyed the legitimacy of Biden. And Biden may now be confronted from day one with having to put down violence on the streets. And I'm not certain that this is not really what Trump wants. Trump is going to be with the United States and the rest of the world, believe me, for another 50 years. If we still have sprouting the seeds sown by Hitler, how many years after the Second World War? Even if Trump leaves the White House in January next year, the seeds sown in America will still be with the Americans for the next 50 years.
Wow. Prof, thank you once again for tonight. From the questions here, seems like the viewers have really enjoyed this as well. There's some comments here in terms of Cote d'Ivoire, but I think you've already addressed them. So for those comments that are coming in regarding Africa and Cote d'Ivoire, Prof has already spoken to the role of African leaders in that regard. So sorry if I did not put your questions forward. But thank you once again, Prof. Thank you to our viewers for staying with us through the program. We will be back here next week, same time. And thank you for joining.